All right. Tonight's presentation is by Benjamin Mako Hill. It gives me great pleasure to bring him in here tonight. He's going to be talking about remixing, Wikipedia, peer production, a lot of buzzwords that I think he's going to make very clear to us before the end of the night. I met Mako, I think, probably at the Sydney Ubuntu Developer Summit.
Yeah.
That was in 2005, and I've run across paths with him several times since then. But it's been a few years since I've seen him. When I saw on the mailing list that he was going to be in town, I thought, let's get him in here, because it's sure to be both an entertaining and an educational experience for us. So I want to turn the stage over to Mako.
All right, great. All right, cool. So thank you so much for having me here. So I give a little bit more about myself as a way of background. I've been contributing to, in ways that I'll talk about, I've been contributing to a bunch of basically free software projects for now many years, since I was 12 years old in the early 90s. I've been working in this space for a whole time. I recently sort of made a transition, not recently, I guess now at this point it's almost 5 or 6 years ago, to sort of try to study these things in a more academic context. So I've been a graduate student at MIT for most of the last 8 years, and I will be starting in the fall at the University of Washington as an assistant professor, where I will continue a research project which is studying free software and free culture communities, like the projects that I'll be talking to you tonight. In fact, I'll be talking to you a little bit about my research here. In many ways, this is a talk which tries to bridge some of my work as sort of a person who develops and works with free software and free culture communities, and someone who now studies them to sort of figure out how they work. And so, I'm not sure what the protocol is here normally, but I want to keep this interactive. I want to talk with people. I'd love to hear from you. And you said the total time is to try to keep it like
About 10 after 8, I think would be good.
great. So
We need time to give away the Raspberry Pi.
Great. I'll push things if it looks like we're running out of time, but sounds good. So awesome. So I framed this today in terms of this term peer production, and I swear this is my only academic slide that I have in here. This is the guy who coined the term peer production, but I'm just trying to throw that out here as a way of talking about it. Peer production. This guy Yochai Benkler coined this term peer production as a way of explaining the emergence of a whole bunch of different phenomena which we're all familiar with, and sort of drawing them together. His idea was that the internet had driven the costs, the sort of communication costs, so low that they made possible the aggregation of many small contributions from many, perhaps only slightly motivated people, and that all these people who were maybe only a little bit motivated by something were now able to contribute to these big projects, and through that process we were able to end up with this stuff which was big and successful, and which historically had only really been possible through the creation of sort of markets and firms, right? So for Benkler, the sort of archetypes of peer production, when he says peer production, and actually when he coined this term in 2002, he was actually, in his article, he wrote about Linux and Wikipedia. Wikipedia at that point was a project with a couple thousand articles and maybe even a few hundred contributors. He sort of picked the right horse to bet on in that case, right? Wikipedia was about a year old, but pointed to a whole bunch of examples of places on the internet, like Wikipedia and like Linux and like GNU and like a lot of different other sort of examples of projects, and said these are all really interesting and exciting, and they're made possible through this similar sort of dynamic around low communication costs, and through this similar form of sort of new form of organization, which is this organization made possible through the aggregation of many of these small sort of contributions. Now, as I've mentioned, I've been playing in this space for a long time. Since I was 12, I've been contributing to a whole series of peer production projects. I started out working as a software developer, sort of as a hobbyist, in a number of projects. Debian is the first project which I really cut my teeth on. Been contributing to Debian since the mid-90s, and really mid to late 90s, and had worked a lot in that. I was part of the founding team for the Ubuntu project, sort of part of the team back before it was even called the Ubuntu project, when we were at nonameyet.com. And since reasonably early days, I've been a contributor to the Wikipedia project. So part of the reason that I like this concept of peer production is it provides a label and a way of thinking about how all these things that I like separately are all sort of can be tied together or thought of in the same way. Now, my experience with these projects, and over the last 15 years or so, has really excited me in ways that are similar to the way in which it's excited, Benkler, who coined the term peer production, as a potential for a way of organizing production in different ways. And they're exciting not only because they've built large, sort of successful projects and products in various ways, although and they've been successful in the sense that all three of these projects are used by lots of people. And it's true that all three of these projects are used by lots of people. Debian is used by millions, Ubuntu is used by now, in many cases this is probably quite low. I mean, the numbers that I've seen recently are upwards of 20 million, or maybe even 25 million. It's very hard to tell how many users there are of a piece of free software, of course, because people can sort of just copy it without telling you, in a way that if you're a proprietary software company, it's a little easier to track. Wikipedia, of course, is now read by more than 500 million people each month. But they're exciting not only because they've built these great things which lots of people use all the time, but also because they've built large communities of volunteers who have sort of contributed to these things. Debian has many thousands of volunteer contributors. Ubuntu has many as well, and of course Wikipedia has, if you count hundreds of thousands in just English, hundreds of thousands of contributors in English, but many more, but many more in other languages as well, closer to 1 million if you look at all the different languages. But I've also worked on a whole bunch of other projects, and not every project I've worked on, to say the least, has been as successful as those other three, right? Although every one of these projects up here, I can give you a short thing. So Debian NP was a version of Debian made for NGOs and nonprofits. AcaWiki is a wiki for summaries of academic articles. Selectricity is a piece of software that I wrote to do election software. And then Partex was a piece of software I wrote in a startup that did, again, sort of democratic decision-making software. Now, although each of these projects were built user communities with hundreds or even thousands of users, which is more than I can say about some other pieces of software which I've not put up here, most of which weren't even successful enough to get a logo. But most of these projects, all of these projects, despite the fact that they had built sizable communities of users, struggled to attract even a single volunteer contributor. And I want to suggest something which, I don't know, how many people here have released a piece of software as free software? So a few people. So despite the hype, as these people will probably know, it's these projects, the ones up here, which are more typical of what usually happens in peer production, I want to argue. And although they are not failures per se, they're sort of failures of collective action, or failures of community building, or failures of peer production. Now, what I'm going to try to argue tonight is that we know. I'm going to try to argue that we know a lot about how peer production projects work in Wikipedia, in remixing communities, another area of peer production. So you can think of media remixing, code building, and in software. And we can describe in detail some of the dynamics in peer production. But I want to suggest that what we don't know nearly as well is how to systematically sort of produce peer production success. Although some projects, like those big three projects you knew about, become big and successful, like Wikipedia and Linux. The vast majority are not, and we don't really know why. I want to suggest, right? I mean, so as someone who's done these things and been successful, I couldn't really tell you why. But at least this is part of the reason I decided to go back and start studying these things. To answer this question, I want to suggest that what we need to do is do a better job of seeking out and studying failures, both within successful projects and specifically within these sort of broader communities of peer production. Sort of like, we can think of them as sort of industries of peer production projects. And I want to show that despite our advocacy and rhetoric, there's no shortage of these failures. And I'm going to point to some work, mostly my work, some of my research, because I'm more familiar with it, but some of it also from other people, that is trying to systematically learn from failures. And I'm going to hope to try to encourage a bunch of you to join me and others who are engaged in this sort of process. So, as I already suggested, we know a lot about how peer production and how Wikipedia and how free software works. And we know it from in a few different ways. One important way we know this is from sort of academics who study it, like myself. So I'll toot my own horn in this way. So if we go to Wikipedia, think about Wikipedia. We know an enormous amount about how Wikipedia works from the academic perspective. So back in one of the things that I do as an academic who studies Wikipedia is that back in 2008, I decided that it would be nice if an academic went to the conference of Wikipedians and wrote about and decided and gave a talk about all of the work that all the academics had done. I mean, it's a weird thing where there's lots of people who are out there studying Wikipedia, and there are lots of people out there studying free software projects. But for the most part, the people that are actually doing these projects don't talk to them. And so they sort of like, there's lots of great knowledge which is being created, but which is not being communicated to the people who would be most able to put it to use. So I thought this was too bad, and I said, great, I'm going to give a literature review of all of the papers which have been published about on Wikipedia within the last year. I'll just do it, and I will go to the conference and I'll summarize all of the work that's been done. That was my suggestion. And I submitted this as a proposal to a talk to the conference. They thought it sounded great. The organizers, they accepted it. You can read the quote up here. I said this talk will provide a quick tour, a literature review, so on and so forth. I then, of course, because I'm sort of lazy, 2 weeks before the conference, I decided I should really, put this together. I did a little bit of a Google Scholar search to sort of build the literature, and what I got back was a search result like this, which says about 800 results. And I was like, oh man. I tried to import this into my bibliographic software, and I got banned from Google Scholar for like abusing their API because I couldn't like import all of this data, right? There were, and it's true, that there were 800 papers that had been published about Wikipedia in the previous year, or close to it. And of course, that at a 45-minute talk slot, so this works out to 3.4 seconds per paper. So I mean, obviously, I had to help, enlist some other people. This is just a sort of the count of papers published per year with the term Wikipedia in the title, right? Again, this is Google Scholar data. Academics have written a lot about Wikipedia. There are more than 500 papers published each year, and although we may have reached a peak, in the last year we've sort of plateaued in some ways. It's not really slowing. We're on track this year to meet or surpass that. We know a lot about about Wikipedia from research in these communities. But we don't have to look at academics. We also know a lot from looking within our communities as well. This is a book published by a number of Wikipedians, Phoebe Ayers, who was on the Wikimedia Foundation Board of Directors and who's now actually just elected to the board again last week. Charles Matthews, who's a mathematician who was for a period of time the most active contributor to Wikipedia, mostly articles about math. And they wrote a book called How Wikipedia Works. It's a great book. It is 536 pages long, and claims on the back of it, the book itself claims that it is very incomplete. I like that one of the reviews said, this book has just enough to get you started editing, right? You can read 600 pages and you will know just enough to participate in it, right? Because we've documented Wikipedia's processes in detail. I was asked to blurb and review the book, and I read it through, and I realized that I actually knew most of the content already, and it sort of drove home to me the idea that we really do know a lot about how these projects work. And of course, Wikipedia itself has produced enormous amounts of documentation internally about how Wikipedia works. And if you look at any big free software project, you see the same thing. Not always, but there is very often, sometimes there are projects that are completely undocumented. Frequently, there are enormous amounts of documentation of various ways about how the project works, about how the processes within the project work, a lot of sort of meta documentation. Wikipedia alone has many thousands, tens of thousands of pages of policy. There are dozens of subcategories of policy pages to help browsers understand the policies, basic information, best practices, tons and tons and tons and tons. It's really interesting. I had a friend who wrote a paper for a law review. I don't know if you've ever seen like a law review article, but the law review articles have like imagine like the most ridiculous like footnoting practice, and then like take it to its illogical extreme. She had a reviewer come back and say, you need to have a footnote for this where you say Wikipedia requires a computer to edit. And she's like, how can I find a footnote for that? And it turns out Wikipedia had in 2 places documented that in fact you need a computer to edit it, right? These are very well documented processes. We know a lot about how Wikipedia works, and we know a lot about how lots of other examples of free notes or software projects work as well.
You mentioned footnote. Can you go back
Yeah.
one slide? So I was just looking at the bottom, VTE. What does that mean?
This is, gosh, I think that this is, I don't exactly recall, but I think that the E is edit. This is a template which exists on lots of different pages, and these normally, if you edit the page itself, you won't be able to edit the contents of this. So they've added a little button here so that you can interact with the direct content of this sidebar.
Oh.
This is a complicated aspect of how Wikipedia works. They've actually just in the last couple of weeks launched a visual editor, which is trying to hide some of these details and allow you to just edit it in the same way you would edit a document in a word processor. So we know a lot about how Wikipedia works, but I want to draw a distinction between this knowledge and knowledge about why Wikipedia works. And I'm using Wikipedia as the example here, but we can talk about it. I'm going to pretty soon start talking about free software projects and other things as well. For the purposes of this talk, the difference between how and why is the difference between a description on the one hand, which is sort of what I've pointed to in the last set of slides, and a sort of causal statement of what is necessary for success, right? Because there are lots of reasons to believe that not everything that Wikipedia does is an important part of its recipe for success. There are hundreds of pages of documents there, hundreds of pages in how Wikipedia works, and probably not everything documented in there is a critical portion of its success. Here's an example. Wikipedians, people on Wikipedia have a lot of lame edit wars. If you have not seen the page WP Lame, or Wikipedia's lamest edit wars, I recommend you check it out. It is enormous. It, again, also has many sub-pages where people document many of the very lame things that Wikipedians argue about. Here's one example that I found particular, that I like in particular. I will not state whether or not I've been involved in. This is the edit war over how tall Ken Masters is. Now, Ken Masters, you may or may not know, is a character in the sort of video game, Street Fighter 2 and so on and so forth. Yeah, right. Ken Masters is fictional. There's been a huge amount of debate on Wikipedia on how tall Ken Masters is and how that should be described in his article. Now, there's a lot of ambiguity about this because, of course, Ken Masters doesn't have a height. He's a fictional character, and as a result, some material have listed his produced by the game manufacturer have listed his height as one thing. Some other material have listed his height as something else. Wikipedians have huge arguments about which one is the most correct, the most canonical source, so on and so forth. Right? This is just one example. Wikipedians have been banned. Major Wikipedians were banned. The most active Wikipedian was banned over a multi-year-long edit war over what the article on the city that is called Gdansk or Danzig should be called, and which one should be what order they should be listed in, how they should be described at different times, like very complicated issues. Now, does Wikipedia succeed because people spend tens of thousands of hours arguing about things like fictional characters' heights? Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I mean, in some ways, right? Maybe this is something which engages people. Maybe people become connected to the project through arguing about, crappy things that no one cares about. Not no one, almost no one cares about, right?
Well, they care.
Right, they care. Someone cares, right? So does Wikipedia succeed because people do this, or does it succeed in spite of it, right? Or is it just simply orthogonal? Is it unrelated, right? Here's another example. Wikipedians give. Actually, you can see on the back of my computer, I have a picture. Looks a bit like this. This is a barn star. Another thing that Wikipedians do a lot is they give each other these little social awards called barn stars. Barn stars are just pictures of stars. These stars that sort of serve a semi-structural, semi-decorative purpose on barns. But of course, these don't serve any purpose because they functional because they're just pictures. But Wikipedians give each other little pictures to thank each other for doing things or to award them. Anyone can give a Barn Star. They're a nice little thing. I've received a couple. Like, it's a reasonably good feeling. Here's an example of a Barn Star being given by the Great Llama, an active Wikipedian, to Jimbo Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, for creating Wikipedia, improving articles, and creating Wikipedia. Right now, there's good evidence that there's been some good evidence that Barn Stars have a positive effect in the behavior of individual editors. At least those who are sort of randomly selected to give them. If you randomly select Barn Stars and randomly give them, you can see a little bit of a positive effect. But I've also shown in some other research that I've done that this effect actually only applies to a subset of editors, and they may even hurt or reduce contributions among others because they might create sort of a sense of like I finished this, great. I feel like I've earned this thing, like a badge, right? You've accomplished something, and you might feel less motivated to contribute. Now, my point here is not to go down that rabbit hole, but to ask this question, which is more organizational and fundamental. Does Wikipedia or communities in general succeed because of Barn Stars or things like it, or do they succeed in spite of them, or is it just not related, right? Looking at the effect of Barn Stars on individuals can't tell us if, on the organizational level, Wikipedia is more or less successful because of Barn Stars. To answer this, what we need is some sort of hypothetical Wikipedia without them, right? We need to compare the Wikipedia, which is exactly the same, to Wikipedia except doesn't have Barn Stars, to the one that does, or something like this, right? And there are real consequences to this difference between thinking about individual motivations of editors and questions about organizational levels, certain types of success. Understanding the how of Wikipedia means we can make websites that work a lot like Wikipedia. If we know how Wikipedia works, we can make websites that are like Wikipedia. But not understanding the why means that they often still don't work, even when we do most of the things that Wikipedia does. Because we don't understand which of the things that Wikipedia does, which part of the how is important, and how these qualities sort of, or processes are sort of contingent and interactive. So here's a little bit of a thought experiment. Now, I mean, this is not just a thought experiment. I want to make successful wikis. I have failed at making wikis in the past, right? I want to make successful wikis, and I want to make wikis that are, as successful as Wikipedia, or at least as close to that as possible. And I'm going to do that by applying all of our knowledge about how Wikipedia works. So here's my plan. I'm going to take the software from Wikipedia. I want to take the basic principles and policies and practices. I'm going to take all those rules and policies. I'm just going to copy them over. I'm going to get a bunch of active Wikipedians, some of the most active Wikipedians and founders, right? I'm going to get Jimmy Wales, right? So get some of the leadership as well, right? Jimmy Wales and maybe the most active Wikipedian at the time, right? And I'm going to go create a whole set of wikis, and I'm going to call it so here's the software, right? The policies, the contributors, and the founders, right? So I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to call my new project Wikia, right? So I don't know if people know this. Wikia is a for-profit company which was created by Jimmy Wales and Angela Beasley, who was one of the most active and respected Wikipedians when the company was founded in 2005. They are contributed to primarily by, or about half of their contributions come from people who are active Wikipedians. They use the exact same software as Wikipedia, and they have imported wholesale tons of policies from Wikipedia. They have tried to take the Wikipedia model and apply it somewhere else. They have done the copying of the how. They have created my thought experiments, right? Now, more than 1/3 of the contributors, as I mentioned, more than 1/3 of the contributors to Wikia are the same people as well. So we even are talking about the same group of contributors. Now, this is a graph that shows the number of wikis and the number of contributors to Wikia wikis. And I've cropped it at about 100 contributors because you can't see anything here anymore, not because there's nothing out. This goes out to tens of thousands. There are some incredibly successful Wikia wikis. I mean, the ones you might have heard of. A lot of them are around sort of like Wikipedia, the Star Wars wiki, Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, and Memory Beta, and you just keep going. Lostpedia, WoW wiki, the World of Warcraft one. A lot of these projects are reasonably big. Wikia has had many successes, but none of them at the level of Wikipedia. But the median number of contributors to a Wikia wiki is 6, right? Half of all wikis on Wikia have 6 contributors or fewer. And I'm not trying to criticize Wikia here. I think Wikia has done enormously well. They produced many hundreds of active, thriving projects.
So Wikia is a hosting platform?
That's right. They're like a wiki farm. They're just a company that creates wikis that are as similar to Wikipedia as possible, like except usually focused on a particular subtopic. Always focused on some subtopic, and they borrowed heavily from Wikipedia along a bunch of these dimensions. But for every, and some of these projects are doing enormously well. In fact, some of these projects are doing in some ways better than Wikipedia did. They're increasing their contributors. They're really thriving. But for every active, thriving project, there's a string of failures, basically thousands of basically complete failures to mobilize anything more than a tiny handful of contributors. And wikis are really very similar to Wikipedia. And I want to be clear, there are important differences, right, between Wikipedia and Wikia. Wikia has advertisements, for example, Wikipedia does not. Wikis tend to be focused on topics, Wikipedia isn't. So on notability guidelines are relaxed, et cetera, et cetera. But that's sort of my point here, right? Because, that's not sort of my point, that is my point here. By understanding those differences, we can begin to understand why Wikipedia succeeded where so many of these other projects failed to attract anybody, right? What do people think the average number of contributors is to a free software project? You can't answer because we were talking about the cigar, and you know because you work at SourceForge. So we look at SourceForge, right? We can go to SourceForge, we can go to Google Code, we can go to GitHub, we can go wherever you want. What do people think the median number of contributors are to a free and open source software project?
2?
2.
He's told me it's 3.
Said 2.
I was going with 3.
3.
And I'll go for 4.
4. All right. Well, you guys are very, very optimistic. The median number of contributors to a free software project, hosted on SourceForge or any of these other places, is 1, a single developer.
None of them have 0.
That's right. That's right. You can't structurally, you can't have 0. The median number of contributors is 0, a single developer. And you see this super strong sort of power line distribution here, right? And you'll see this over and over. But again, this is a little bit unfair because this is all projects, right? This includes ideas for projects that like never got off the ground, including lots of projects with no code at all. It's hard to expect people to show up and contribute to just an idea. What if we limit it to mature, very mature projects who've have code and sort of have something out there? The median number of contributors to a mature project on SourceForge.
I thought that's what you were talking about in the first place.
All right, so now you say 4, right?
Say 5.
You say 5. Pessimist, right? 1. The median number of contributors to a mature project, to a mature project in SourceForge is 1. The scale moves, and look at this, like the scale moves, but the distribution is exactly the same, right? Like the number of projects that make it up to this is different, but this distribution, the vast majority have 0, and a small number have more. But again, what if we look at like popular projects, popular pieces of free software which have been downloaded? What do I say here? 100 times or more. We can also look or have released 3 times in a period of 6 months. That's a metric people use for success. The median number of contributors then? Now you're all 1. It's 2. It's 2. So simple, right? The median number of contributors for a project which is built which is sort of built a user base, as defined by some like a cutoff of 100 downloads a month, is 2 developers, right? And as I said, the numbers are extremely similar if we look at GitHub and code. They're actually even more depressing on GitHub, despite the fact that the cost to sort of forking is is low. Even if you look at watchers, the median number of people watching the project in GitHub is the median number of watchers is 0. No one's looking. Anyway, the vast majority of what we know about free software and also what we know about peer production more broadly is from this long tail of these very successful and unusual projects, the ones that are way out here, right? When we want to figure out how wikis work, we go and we look at Wikipedia, right? We look at the projects which are out here, but those projects are very unusual, right? And we don't quite know because we're not comparing it to all the projects over here. We don't really understand why. What's the difference between all of these projects and the weird ones out here? And because for the most part, we don't look at all those projects over there because they're uninteresting, right? Nothing ever really happened there. or not very much, or you know, we sort of don't know. So this is I'm sort of a statistician and a math. This is my little mathematical make-believe mathematical model I sort of put out there. Yeah.
You're talking about contributors and developers, and it kind of got me curious about one of the projects that we've got in-house. Jim, what's the project team for LTSP these days?
I'm much less involved with it than I used to be, but there's probably 6 or 8 people doing real work.
Yeah. I think that.
We have a conference every fall, and there's 15 people that show up for that.
I mean, and this is that I know these. I've met people who are like depressed because their project never really took off. You know, they only have 5 or 6 contributors, and I'm here to tell